Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Regent University. My name is Meg Kelsey, and I'm the director of the Center for Global Justice here at the law school. Tonight, we are honored to co-host the event with our partners at Safe House Project, Town Bank Mortgage, and Seven Cities Church. Our mission at the Center for Global Justice is to promote human rights and the rule of law through research, education, and advocacy. Within the center, I direct Virginia's only human trafficking legal clinic, where our students work directly with survivors, overcoming legal barriers, including those that impact housing. With our collaboration with Safe House Project, we regularly see in the clinic how housing insecurity creates vulnerability to exploitation. Tonight's topic connects two crises we witness in our community every day, whether we realize it or not. As someone who grew up in Hampton Roads, I care about how these challenges affect our families, neighborhoods, and region. We're here tonight to explore how housing insecurity doesn't exist in isolation, but creates dangerous vulnerabilities. When someone can't access safe housing through traditional means, they often become targets of traffickers who prey on desperation, sometimes trading shelter for exploitation, which we have seen time and time again in the stories of our clients in the clinic. So we've chosen the Jeffersonian debate format because this particular challenge requires collaborative solutions, a safe space for open dialogue and debate. But unlike traditional debates, we are here for genuine exploration and problem solving. We'll hear diverse perspectives from housing advocates, law enforcement, survivors, and community leaders, and hopefully work towards identifying actionable solutions. You are here because you care about our community. Whether you're a student, a realtor, a lawyer, a survivor, or a concerned neighbor, you're here because these issues matter to you. So thank you. Thank you for coming. Thank you for taking time to participate in problem solving. Now I'm honored to introduce our moderator, Brittany Dunn. Brittany is a nationally recognized leader in the fight against human trafficking. Before co-founding Safe House Project in 2017, she spent a decade in mergers and acquisitions, leading international business development across Europe and Southeast Asia. Her corporate experience in strategic planning and cross-sector collaboration now drives her impactful work combating human trafficking. Under her leadership, Safe House Project has built a pioneering network of safe housing and holistic care services while driving systemic change at local, state, and federal levels. She serves on Governor Youngkin's Commission on Human Trafficking Prevention and has been featured in Forbes, The Hill, and CBN for her insights. As a military spouse and mother of two, she brings both professional expertise and personal commitment to building safer communities. And I'm honored to call her a friend as well as a partner in this work. Brittany, I'll turn it over to you to guide us through tonight's debate.
Wonderful. Well, thank you for having us here tonight. We are really excited about this opportunity. As Meg mentioned, a Jeffersonian debate has anybody in here ever heard of a Jeffersonian debate? Okay, so a handful of people. It came from the idea that Thomas Jefferson convened at his dinner table and in debate structure people who come from varied backgrounds, varied levels of expertise, and brought them to the table to make sure that we aren't trying to solve problems in the echo chambers of our own experiences or our own perspectives. I think that hits home this week, especially as Meg and I were dialoguing. I had a lot of people ask me, are you all still going to host this event tonight in the wake of last week? They asked me, why would you enter onto a college campus on a topic that could cause controversy? And I think the reality is that every single individual in this room, you all included, but also our speakers, recognize that if we shrink back from the challenges that our community is facing, if we don't get out there and dialogue about practical solutions, then we aren't going to see change on behalf of those that we get to live, work, and play with. So I just want to thank you all for being here tonight and being part of the dialogue. But what I'd love to do is at least start by going down the table, starting with my favorite, Jordan Brown. They're all my favorite. This is what I tell my children. I said, it's like, you're my favorite boy, you're my favorite girl, you're my favorite person over the age of 35. So you start now.
Good evening. My name is Jordan Brown. I am a pastor at Ocean View Church in the Ocean View section of Norfolk, Virginia. I've been in that position for almost 4 years. It has been an honor and a privilege to be in that position. I also serve, as of this weekend, as the board chair for an anti-human trafficking nonprofit called Free Kind. We seek to prevent human trafficking in our communities while supporting survivors on our journey to freedom. I've been doing that since 2020 under the direction of our executive director, Lisa Kersey, who's sitting in this audience. Even before that, I've had a heart for making sure that those who are being trafficked have the opportunity to find freedom, hope, and belonging. One of the big things that also has my heart is housing. For the past 4 or 5 years in the city of Norfolk, I've been a supreme advocate for housing in our communities. I don't know if anybody remembers that during the pandemic, there was this thing at the old Greyhound bus station that looked like a tent community. I ran that. And so it's one of the things that has really continued to capture my heart. And throughout the years, I've had the opportunity to put 2 and 2 together and realize that one impacts the other and that it continues to be cyclical. I'm very glad and appreciative to be here. Thank you guys so very much.
Good evening. I am Ramin Fadahi. I am a state prosecutor, a former federal prosecutor, and public defender. I currently serve as a Commonwealth's Attorney and Chief Prosecutor for the City of Norfolk. In that capacity, I am also indirectly responsible for the Norfolk Family Justice Center. My Chief Deputy, Krista Martinez, is the co-director of Norfolk's Family Justice Center. For those unfamiliar with the Family Justice Center model, it is designed to be a one-stop shop for victims of interpersonal violence, trafficking, and sexual violence. I'm proud to be here among this group. Thank you.
Good evening, I'm Valerie Ryland. I am here on behalf of Centera Health. I serve as their regional director for inpatient case management with responsibility over their Southeast market, which is Virginia Beach General, Princess Anne Hospital, and it also includes Elizabeth City's Centera Albemarle. I have had the pleasure of working also at Centera Elite Hospital over the past 10 years. The impact that we've experienced in having human trafficking victims come in through our emergency departments is astounding, and really having a lack of resources to connect them with in that acute moment. It really just, we feel that as a healthcare organization, really want to make sure that we are partnering outside of our hospitals and our medical centers to collaborate with the community to reach this very important concerning issue here in Tidewater and Hampton Roads. Thank you so much for having me here tonight.
Good evening. My name is Lou Haddad, and I'm a recovering CEO. I've recently retired from a New York Stock Exchange listed company, and through the course of my previous career, had the good fortune to be involved in a number of affordable housing efforts, some successful and some not. In addition to that, my wife and I, Mary, have a foundation that is for the service of at-risk children. We just recently celebrated our 25th anniversary of that foundation. And one of the more detestable things that we try and fund is the trafficking problem. I look forward to speaking tonight, and thanks very much for having me.
Good evening. My name is Carla Bryce. I'm a community financial engagement lender at Town Bank Mortgage. My background is 30 years in banking and about 20 years in human services, working a lot with the City of Norfolk, Habitat for Humanity, also in the financial industry on the CRA side, and just really making sure that we're casting a broader net to individuals that may have challenges going into their first home or even housing in general. So just making sure that we become a resource, provide resources, trying to make home ownership or housing easier to digest. I look forward to sharing more about that with you in the next hour or so. Thank you.
Is it working?
Yeah.
Works great.
Hi, I'm Lindsay Gray. I am a Pacific Northwest native, so I'm a transplant here to you guys. Happy to be here. I work with Safe House Project, hold a variety of different certifications, and have had a long journey from EMS, working 911, to mental health, and working with street youth and adolescents. If any of you know anything about Portland, Oregon, we have a pretty huge homeless populace, particularly with street youth. We've held the high achievement of most homeless youth in the country for a very long time, so that was sarcasm. It's okay to laugh. That was my background when I came here, and I have to be honest with you, I hid the fact that I was a survivor for a very long time because I put a lot of time and effort into my career, into being respected, into my personal relationships, all of those things. And so I would admit that I was abused, but it took me a very long time to admit that I was trafficked several times. So I think being able to be here tonight and work with Safe House Project as the Virginia Regional Operations Coordinator, and I came directly here after they were so wonderful as to tell me, what are you doing spending all your time with teens? And as much as I loved those teens and I got to see and help there, I get to see and help in a front with people that I have a huge heart for because I've walked in their shoes. So thank you guys for having me.
Hello, I'm Kimberly Denton. I'm a realtor with Berkshire Hathaway. I've been in the business about 16 years. I'm also a member of the Government Affairs Committee for the Hampton Roads Realtors Association. I have recently been put on the Homeownership Advisory Council for Virginia Housing. We spend a lot of time talking to our clients about affordable housing, and we get the calls when people say, I don't know where I'm gonna live. So I'm here to talk about it from the other side of we're the ones getting the calls saying, where do we go?
Good evening. I'm Sharon Schoaf, the Housing Development Manager for the City of Virginia Beach Department of Housing. Our goal is to incentivize the creation of more affordable housing in the City of Virginia Beach and also get the word out about the need for affordable housing. We have a campaign called Housing Matters to educate the public on what the needs are in our community. Before I came to the City of Virginia Beach, though, I worked since 1996 for a nonprofit that was created by the city housing department called Virginia Beach Community Development Corporation. And so when I was there, I did development, a lot of grant writing to get service money, which was really hard to find. So that nonprofit served a lot of vulnerable populations, persons with severe mental health disabilities, homeless, disabled veterans. So I was involved in both the housing side and the services funding side for that nonprofit.
So as you can tell, we have incredible experts with us this evening, but I also know that you may be an expert. And so the great thing also about the Jeffersonian style debate is if you have commentary, we want to hear from you. You may have background and perspective to add. Don't be afraid to raise your hand. To give you a little bit of a format, in order for us to drive towards solutions, we really have to understand very concretely, why are we at the place where we're even having this conversation? What is the historical context in Virginia or in Hampton Roads for the affordable housing crisis? When we think about affordable housing and the housing crisis, does anybody want to even go back to the 1960s or the 1970s and what kind of guided some of the challenges that we're facing today?
So I was invited into rooms facilitating a nonprofit geared toward faith-based social justice, and somehow ended up partnering with the city to run its first ever homeless shelter. And in that, we got a lot of history and understanding exactly what happened in certain spaces, including a place that rhymes with Norfolk, Virginia. I've been told that in certain neighborhoods they would have amazing and beautiful houses, but the houses would actually be for multiple families and something that they have called SROs, single room occupancy. And after a while, these houses would be turned into single family homes, which dissipates the ability to hold the number of people in certain neighborhoods. You can add to that a whole lot of other history that we do not have time to discuss. And instead, I will fast forward with the understanding of the cost of housing and inflation. Folks were simply not able to afford the same house that they could afford 10, 20, 30, 40, 60, 70 years ago. And so this causes a dilemma. And what do we do with this? Well, there are different things. Some can speak to this situation here as far as having certain kinds of housing, whether it be Section 8 or other means of affordable housing, or neighborhoods that aspire to have mixed income housing, which we've been working toward. But as we've seen, especially in recent history, when eggs can become $9, you can imagine what houses can do. And we've seen the housing market over the past years have changed. I'm not the realtor, I will not speak to that, please do not yell at me. But what we've seen is that throughout the years with that, and also the earning wages staying the same in many different arenas, it is a means to suffice that folks can't do what they used to do. And in many cases that includes live how they used to live or live where they used to live. The age of the roommate seems to be back then. Young folks are moving back in with their parents. Parents are not able to support the way that they used to. The family system now seems more like a financial dependency more than it is just a family unit as we've known it. I hope that somebody else will take it and run as well, but I think that hopefully that's a halfway decent foundation. If not, you guys can yell at me later.
I don't mind picking up there. Like, those of us who live in Hampton Roads and those of us who grew up in Hampton Roads need to address the ugly history of racial exclusion that animates Hampton Roads. There was a series of municipal actions that I refer to as the annexation wars that took place in what used to be called the Twin Cities, Norfolk and Portsmouth, and involved their surrounding counties, which included Elizabeth City County, Warwick County, Mansfield County, Princess Anne County, and Norfolk County. Names which are probably unfamiliar to any newcomers. That's because they've all ceased to exist. In the 1950s, as white flight was taking hold, as the GI Bill was making housing available in suburban neighborhoods that had covenants that excluded black people and brown people from living in them, we saw a flight of white middle-class families from Norfolk and from Portsmouth into the counties. As it is now, technically, a city was independent of its counties. We're the only place in Virginia other than Baltimore and St. Louis where that cities had the right to annex all or part of a county. And that is what Norfolk and Portsmouth did into the 1940s and 50s. What we saw was that primarily white people and primarily wealthy white people would move out and move into Princess Anne County, move into Norfolk County and such. Norfolk and Portsmouth would attempt to preserve their racial balance and tax base by annexing portions of those counties. So Military Circle, East Ocean View, those areas were part of Norfolk and Princess Anne counties. The Western Branch and Churchland were all part of Norfolk County. Eventually, the city fathers of Virginia Beach and Chesapeake ended the argument by going to the General Assembly and having themselves chartered as cities, because a city can't annex another city. And that effectively landlocked Norfolk and Portsmouth. I grew up in Virginia Beach, so I'm not coming at this as purely a Norfolk guy. I'm a North End boy. The end result of this was that there were housing policies that were specifically designed to benefit wealthy middle-class people, disproportionately white, and then there were efforts at packing of poor people, who were disproportionately black, into public housing in Norfolk and Portsmouth, which now we know from a criminological point of view is itself criminogenic. But the end result of all of this, whether it's minimum lot sizes, the absence of sidewalks in a lot of neighborhoods, including the neighborhood in which I grew up, whether it was the absence of redevelopment and housing authorities. There is still no public housing authority in the city of Chesapeake. All of these means that we have it worse in Hampton Roads than in a lot of other parts of the United States. Housing is scarce in America right now. But Hampton Roads is the most housing-stressed part of Virginia. It costs more of a person's income to live in Hampton Roads than in Fairfax County or Arlington. Not necessarily because our housing median price is more expensive, because people don't make that kind of money. I could talk at length about the fact that if you took Norfolk's murder map and overlaid it with Norfolk's redlining map, its mortgage redlining map, that they would be congruent. But that's a little bit further afield of our topic. So my brand is to tell people really uncomfortable things, so I figured I'd start off and lead. Since you asked about the 60s and 70s, I figured I'd say it.
Well, we have to start somewhere, because if we don't start with where it started from, then we're going to miss the mark. We can't start on a trajectory and be 1 degree off from the beginning and then end up completely off chart. As we continue, I think more people probably do have a lens on this. Also, how does the military community ebbing and flowing into that, or environmental factors like we have some flooding here in the Hampton Roads area, it might impact housing a little bit. Like, how do these layer into this larger discussion? I think I could see Lou had some thoughts.
We have to remember, and this is why I think a lot of these types of problems get washed over, that it's a basic tenet, and I think our Virginia Beach people can confirm this, it's a basic tenet of city government that expenses grow faster than revenue. And so they're always stressed, and they always want to service what is going to narrow that gap the most. So when you think about it, if I'm in charge of a city, I want to change my tax base disproportionately to the services I have to give out. What gets left behind in that equation is housing that could benefit the lower class. So you have this basic problem where you can understand it. I'm not a politician, thank God. You can understand why it gets whitewashed, for lack of a better term, because there's no benefit immediately in narrowing that gap. And there isn't a city in the country that doesn't have that gap. And what can you do? You can raise taxes, which everybody wants. You basically get voted out of office. You can cut services, which nobody wants to see happen. Or you can disproportionately affect your tax base. Well, how do you do that? You bring in higher income people as well as retailers, jobs, and offices. Once again, no one is looking out for the people that are at the bottom. And it doesn't necessarily mean homeless people. It also is working people that really can't make ends meet. I was fortunate enough to be part of a task force at UVA to create 1,500 units of affordable housing. I'm no longer on the board at UVA, but it has started and it's going to be successful. Part of it is to take care of homeless people that have housing insecurity. But another big part of that gets ignored are people that work, for instance, at the University of Virginia, but can't afford to live in Charlottesville. So they are commuting 45 minutes to an hour. And if you think about it, if I'm trying to make ends meet with that commute, and I've got kids at home, can I afford top quality daycare? No. So I've got to find some solution. The problem that we're discussing tonight, it's easy to focus on the poorest of the poor, but the problem is we have a growing class of people that are getting squeezed out because the incomes just aren't moving fast enough with inflation and everything else. So if a city isn't going to take that on because there's no real benefit immediately, then who's left? And that's where we talk about our government programs, our nonprofits, our institutions of higher learning. The UVA is very fortunate. They could contribute enough land to this effort to make that happen. But even that isn't enough. It's not enough just to contribute land. I think our realtors can confirm free land is great, but it's not going to bring it down enough. That basic working person who makes what should be a living wage to be able to afford it. So there's got to be more. One of the things that we could do, and try and scream in the wilderness, is that it's short-sighted to say there's no benefit to helping that tenet of people. Because the truth is, it's costing society a heck of a lot more than it would cost to house them properly. And most of these people, we always hear about the freeloaders and all that, but most of these people are hard-working people that just want the chance to get a piece of the pie, not a big piece, but feed your kids the way you're supposed to and take care of them. And I wish that we could prevail upon the powers that be to see there's no benefit in thinking so short term. It's just like the healthcare system, right? If we don't give health insurance to people, what do? They go to the emergency room, and then they don't pay, and then the rest of us pay. It feeds on itself unless we stop and break that.
So, one, you mentioned the maps. I've actually seen the maps about the redlining compared to health outcomes, compared to education, what's going on in the schools, it all overlaps. And the other thing that's interesting is the amount of owner-occupied housing is lower in a redlined community than renters. So in these areas that we have more renters, you've got schools that are not operating as well, you've got worse health outcomes, all of these things add on to each other. And instead of incentivizing more owner occupancy in these areas, the tax incentives, the assistance that's offered is offered to create more rental housing. And with the way that rents have been increasing, especially the last 5 years since the pandemic, the rental rates are going up so fast that one more increase causes someone to not be able to afford to live in their house anymore. One medical bill causes them to not be able to afford their house anymore. It's these one little things that are causing someone to be in a crisis mode where they can't afford to pay their rent. It could be as simple as the value of my investment property went up, so I'm going to sell it. And when I sell it, the renter has to move out. All of these are creating an environment in which people do not have housing stability. And that is what causes them to go and do things like move into a motel, say yes to somebody who wants them to do something they shouldn't be doing. It adds up. We have programs available for people who are homeless, for people who have been through terrible situations. What we don't have enough of is programs to keep those situations from happening. So we need to catch it and put a safety net before they hit that situation. As simple as giving more access to home ownership to people who are working, they have jobs, they're working hard, they're paying their bills. If we're able to give them an ownership into a house and allow them to have a 30-year fixed mortgage payment instead of a rental payment that's going to go up every year, that in itself can create the stability that some people need in order to not fall into a difficult situation.
And I'm going to add a fact there just for context, because I think they're great points. You can't throw money at everything. We all know that. Like, there's constraints. So 54% of renters in Hampton Roads are cost burdened. So right now the fair market rent for a 2-bedroom is $1,696. That's up 42% in the past 2 years. Workers need an average of $33 per hour to afford housing, and minimum wage right now in the area is $12.41. So the math doesn't line up. Adding numbers to it can help clarify some of the issues. So I think that Sharon had more to add, but I wanted to provide at least some data behind the analytics.
I was just going to weigh in that we opened our Housing Resource Center back in 2018. In the first several years, it seemed like we were able to get people, when they fell into homeless, our goal is to make homelessness rare, brief, and non-recurring. We could get people out pretty quickly. We have rapid rehousing, so if they fell into homelessness, we could find units to put people in and landlords to work with our department and get people housed and stabilized. People need time when they fall into that situation. Stabilizing people, getting them back into a permanent unit as quickly as possible, subsidizing that temporarily till they get back on their feet was really important. But what we have found is now, the whole system is getting backed up because people fall into homelessness and we can't find a place to put them. So they're stuck in the shelter. Homelessness is not becoming brief anymore, it's becoming more lengthy. In our department, what we're trying to do, and I know you're all for home ownership, we need all kinds of housing solutions, and they can't be one size fits all. So people in that situation need to find a place where we can give them those services and they can get stable again. When the rents went up $400 to $500 a month, and the market got tight because of a lack of supply, that created a huge problem for us. So we're focused on getting more large-scale affordable housing in the market. And we're talking about income targeted housing for those who are very low income. We did a housing study back in 2024, and we were told we needed to focus on home ownership too, because there are people in rentals that can't get out of those rentals. So all of these things are creating a market that's just so challenging. I've been doing this since 1996. I have never seen anything like this in terms of the difficulty that so many people are having. Between the first-time home buyers trying to get into a home for the first time, people having to drive to qualify. A colleague that I used to work with at the nonprofit said, I had to move to Suffolk because I had a baby and our house is too small, and now I have to commute and I'm really sick of it and I really want to be back in Virginia Beach. I didn't even realize this. It's hitting the most vulnerable people all the way up to people coming right out of school who are just starting their jobs. A starting salary of a teacher is actually, we consider affordable housing and low-income housing to be targeted to 80% of the median income. HUD establishes those median incomes. And we looked to see in Virginia Beach what a teacher makes starting out. They're considered low income by themselves. So when we build an affordable housing development, and one of them got approved out near the municipal center, there was a lot of people who were against it. It was below the green line in Virginia Beach. A lot of people who live out there were not in favor of it. A teacher starting out would qualify to live there. It's really disheartening when you work in this field to see that. We were working on the comp plan update. After that, they're going to be looking at our zoning regulations, which sometimes make doing the type of housing your community needs very challenging. I was at a community meeting after that development got approved, and the meeting was held in that council person's district. And we were trying to focus in my focus group on the comp plan. All the people at the table could talk about was how angry they were about this getting approved. In the middle of that meeting, some younger people stood up and said, I can't find a place to live. Some of the older people in the room did not realize it. A lot of people don't understand the need. That's why we're trying to get this out there. It's not just the homeless. Those people are the most vulnerable and the most challenging to get housed, but it's hitting everybody.
Do you have something to add, Valerie?
Yeah, I do. It was astounding to me when you mentioned the $33 an hour. So a starting medical social worker who has a master's degree, the starting pay is $30 an hour. So they would qualify for low-income housing. That's disturbing to me. I'm a registered nurse with a bachelor's in nursing, a master's in healthcare administration, and the pay disparities between those two disciplines. And let me tell you, we cannot survive without social workers. You know, they do so much to help our community. But then also thinking about the increased morbidity and mortality rate that is secondary to housing instability and vulnerability, and how much our emergency departments within the Norfolk and Virginia Beach areas have seen such an influx in visits. We see Norfolk patients, we have over 110,000 visits a year. I don't know how familiar you are with the size of that hospital, but they cannot sustain 110,000 visits a year. Most of them are social determinants of health driven. These are people that can no longer age in place. We're now having to place them into long-term care facilities way beyond the years that they would need that level of care, but they no longer have housing because they quit taking care of their medical needs to sustain their housing longer. How do we solve that? How do we work together as a community to take away some of these factors that have been historically in place for years? It's going to take all of us standing up and making that change.
No, and I think that's beautiful, and that's why we're here, right? Like, this is a very complex issue. As you can tell, this is not easy. We can pull the switch in one of these veins, and it's going to have a cascading effect. It takes incremental change in all of these areas. But I wanted to draw out one thing, and we're going to move past it. Does everybody agree that we know what the problem is right now in the area? We really want to focus on human trafficking. The idea of primary prevention would be stopping trafficking before it happens, and so that would be more of the root cause analysis. But we also have tertiary prevention, which is once somebody has exited exploitation and they are back on their path to healing, if they don't have access to housing on the other side of that, it's very easy for re-exploitation to happen. And so that's where just helping prep you all, we're gonna start guiding in that direction. For those in the room who maybe are newer to the issue of human trafficking, it's also easy to say, why does it feel like we're just starting to really talk about this? Does anybody feel like we're talking about human trafficking a whole lot more than we did 5 years ago? Yeah, okay. Well, for context, human trafficking was outlawed in the United States in 2000 through the Trafficking Victims Protection Act. And so we really are only 25 years into our collective response. But does anybody want to guess when we put code on the books in the Commonwealth to actually be able to prosecute sex trafficking? Any guesses? You're not allowed to answer. You're not allowed to answer. You're not. At least he's not allowed to answer. Okay, let's go to the back.
I'll give a shot. 2019.
Thank you for giving a guess. I greatly appreciate you. 2015 is when the Commonwealth passed the legislation to prosecute sex trafficking cases. Anybody want to guess when we did our labor trafficking code? When, Lou?
2020.
2024. So when we're talking about this, I want to provide context that this is a problem that's going to take more than one panel to solve. It has decades and centuries of history into why we're sitting here today. But as we transition a little bit, I would love to draw out some of the vulnerabilities we are seeing for our youth in housing, because Jordan mentioned at the beginning, there's a breakdown of the family unit. We have a lot more kids coming from single parent homes or things along those lines. What is the biggest challenges facing our youth in how it relates to housing today?
Since I was that kid, I grew up in a very affluent home. My family did not struggle for housing, did not struggle for a lot, and yet still it happened to me. So I'm just gonna put that out there. And spending a lot of time working with minors, youth, adolescents, and then, the age bracket between like 20, 21 and 24, 18, 24. I think we see a lot of non-familial guardianship, right? So it's foster care systems, so on and so forth. We all know that after a few placements, when a kid is in their teen years, they're much harder to place. Each one of those placements is recurring trauma. At the very least, it's recurring trauma in the respect that there's an abandonment issue, right? So there's mental health and the trust issues. And that is the very least. As trauma increases, behavioral problems increase, right? Different things like that, and particularly in a CPTSD sense in a developing brain. So I think by the time you see them hit 18 and they age out of the system, if they don't have a job that can support them, which I think we've all learned that that's impossible, right? Okay, they don't have a master's degree at 18, okay? They might have school paid for, maybe, but they don't have their food paid for, they don't have their transportation paid for, and there's no way they're gonna get housing anywhere near the school, even if they did enroll in college. So, what are they gonna do? Well, yeah, and even if they did end up in a decent neighborhood, they have to get somewhere somehow. So that rules out all of the safe housing, right? So not only do they age out and have to find a place to live, but they have to find a job and they have to learn how to support themselves. So we know that 40% of runaway, missing, and or trafficked youth generally have some interaction with non-familial family placements. So that's a huge piece right off the bat. But then I would say, I feel like I need to lay this foundation really quick. I don't know, how many people in here have heard of ACEs? Anybody know what ACEs is? I think this is a really important concept and I don't hear it talked about enough, and so it's gonna be my soapbox every time I speak. ACEs stands for Adverse Childhood Experiences. Mental health practitioners will ask a series of questions and that go through experiences that either you had as a youth or adolescent. The more boxes you check on that list, the higher percentage chance of severe mental health disorders, substance use disorders, behavioral problems, incarceration, you name it. They've even come all the way to data that shows years off of these individuals' lives. So if we look at each one of those, let's break it down, each one of those is a vulnerability, right? Just because you saw your parents arguing frequently at home, does that mean that you have severe trauma? No, but if you saw them arguing frequently at home, one of them was an addict, you experienced sexual trauma, so on and so forth. You start adding those up and they accumulate, right? So in that same vein, I think we see youth experiencing these faces, the checking marks, but then also you're looking at each one of those vulnerabilities. And so for trafficking victims and youth, it really starts with coercion and meeting needs. We do know that the average age an individual who experiences trafficking has their first experience is 12 years old. It is a very high, I believe it's somewhere around 80%. Correct me, Brittany. Is it somewhere around 80?
Child trafficking. So roughly speaking, we're looking at 40 to 50% of child sex trafficking victims will first be trafficked by a family member. But recent stats are showing that's rising to over 60% since COVID.
I think when you start looking at vulnerabilities, the housing situation, vulnerabilities for children are huge because of school districts. I know that at the school district we were in, the elementary school had kids doing drugs in the bathroom. My kids were coming home telling me about drugs for the first time in their life because they were doing drugs in the bathroom, they were dealing drugs, they were jumping each other, they were asking them to be initiated into gangs. Finally, there was a thread on a list of kids' lives, and my son was in that group. So those are vulnerabilities. I don't know about you, but I wouldn't feel comfortable with any of those items, right? So when you start looking at those vulnerabilities and we start looking at parents who cannot afford, and I'm not even talking single, I'm talking middle class parents, 2-parent households, which how many of us can say they grew up in a household with 2 parents? There's a lot of us that didn't have a master's degree, both of them. Right off the bat. You could take it on every specific vulnerability, but when you're looking at the basic of housing, that means those 2 parents are going to be at work and they're going to be at work full time. So who are they going to hire for babysitting? Now they're making over the 80%. They don't qualify for childcare anymore. So they have to pay full price for childcare. Do you think they're going to be able to afford to have a really amazing background check, somebody that can come in and take an incredible care of their child in their own home? Absolutely not. They're going to have to send them somewhere that they can afford because now they're making over 80%. So who knows where that kid's going to end up, right? Like it just goes and goes.
Brittany, I'll add on to that a little bit. I've been wanting to kind of jump in. It's kind of like double dutch, especially when you talk about public housing, because I spent at least 10, 15 years maybe working with the city of Norfolk and in public housing. And we did see a lot of children being compromised, especially during COVID, because we really saw parents dying or health issues, grandparents, aunties, that were taking care of the children that were losing their life or going into the hospital or needing long-term health care. And those children became very vulnerable to where were they going. And it wasn't really always going into some type of foster care. It was going to live with someone else. And that someone else was just anyone else who can take care of this child. The other thing I want to add to, you mentioned that the minimum wage was how much?
$12.41.
$12.81. And so in the last year or two, we were talking about, the jobs are up. People are working, yes, but is it a living wage job? And that makes the economy sound really great when we have so many people working. The job rate is up. But that just means that they're going to get a W-2 at the end of the year. They're clocking in. However, that individual, and I can only speak to the roles that I've had, that's always been with either the city or working with individuals or families that was single parent households. That person making $12.81, and rarely in public housing do you have a parent with 1 kid. Just that happened, right? And so that $12.81 or $15, and 2 or 3 kids having to go to work, maybe having to figure out how to get to work, childcare. I used to tell my families all the time, work on your credit. Try to get your credit where it needs to be. it wasn't about moving or purchasing a home, but it was being able to make that move because oftentimes we forget people live in public housing and they are working. Many of them live there and they're paying market rate rent, right? But here's what happens. The person that takes care of my children, they live in public housing. Or I'm taking care of my mother or my grandmother, they're right around the street. I can't move. This is my community, right? But that individual making $12 or $15, 9 times out of 10, they're living in public housing. They have 2 or 3 kids. And it is not enough. They have to make some very hard decisions. It has a ripple effect. It really does. And especially, again, I can only speak to that community in which I served. And it has a ripple effect, especially to the youth.
No, absolutely. I think let's find a dissenting view because we have very much aligned advocates, which is great. There are dissenting views on this from my public audience or here. What have we seen with the crime rates? Let's go up against what are some of the pushback. One of the very first cases we had in Norfolk was a group of 8-year-old girls in public housing, and an older boyfriend of one of the girls' sisters was recruiting them into a full trafficking ring in downtown Norfolk. And so the recruitment was happening because there was so much vulnerability layered together in one community. We can't also talk about this if we don't acknowledge that there's a concern on the other side, right, about violence and how do those things flow out. How do we acknowledge maybe some of the other perspectives that are out there?
I'll throw it out there that we took our boys out of that school, and it was one of the hardest decisions because when you take kids who do have 2 parents and who are good kids, right? You take those kids that are not involved in a gang and they're not violent and they don't have major behavioral issues out of school because it is dangerous. Who does that leave in school, right? It's not the teacher's fault. So how do we spread it out? That sounds really bad, but when it's existing in a vacuum, that's the only thing you ever know. How is it that you could wake up one day when you grew up with if you grew up in a household where your parents did drugs and your mom sold herself and things were in and out and you've never known any different and you didn't graduate high school and your parents didn't graduate high school and neither did your neighbor, and it's completely acceptable to join a gang because you're able to sell drugs and get a little bit of money to feed yourself. It's completely acceptable to have the pimp hoe culture in some places because you can make enough money to feed your kids. How would they ever know any different? If you grew up that way and your parents grew up that way and your grandparents grew up that way, you're gonna just wake up one morning and be like, I think there's a possible difference from, no, you're not going to. We get hooked on our Starbucks routine. Could you imagine?
Speaking directly to this is the understanding of what we see in the city of Norfolk frequently. 23504 is one of the zip codes for the city of Norfolk. It's also nationally known as one of the major places where you see gang activity, where you also see teen pregnancy, where you see a host of other things. But I apologize in advance because it's probably not going to sound like a dissenter as much as it is one who understands the value of a Genesis moment and a seed bed. I don't want to take us all the way back to the beginning, but I'm reminded that our city is 40% African American. Our city is 40% Caucasian. Our city is also 20% a lot of folks spiced in between. It's an excellent experimental opportunity for unity or flourishing in cultural ways. You look at the public school system and ask yourself why it is 80% African American. And then you do a bit of a rabbit hole dive and you realize that things from the historical nature, we talked about white flight and redlining before, have left it in this space where it has the opportunity to be saved. And this is nothing against you, my girl, by bringing folks back into the space to create the opportunity for others to learn exactly how it got the way that it got. Because the thing about it is, most of these individuals, if you ask them, they're not trying to live that life. It becomes a space where these things operate because it is not all that they know. No way out, survival. It's in the hopes that they can get out of that and then move on to a better life. And so I'm not going to tax an individual for something that they feel like, you know, when an animal is backed into a corner, what do you expect it to do but defend itself? And so for a lot of those students, I've come across many of them in my lifetime working as a college advisor. I have a parent of one of my students sitting on this panel right now, which really caught me off guard. But I had the opportunity to witness this often, and specifically I'd worked in about 5 or 6 different schools. One of my schools, my very first year, was Booker T. Washington High School. And for me, to hear certain conversations was not just sobering, it took the air out of my spirit and my soul in a couple of instances. Because what do you do when you're having a conversation with counselors and they tell you that they overheard 3 students, freshmen or sophomores, talking, and that one of their parents told them that all they had to do was have one more child for their earned income credit on their taxes to be straight. No longer a child that you love, but now a child that serves a financial purpose because you need it to survive. And that's the thinking process. So we need to be able to provide spaces where they no longer have to feel that need. Housing is a major part of this conversation. Trafficking is a major part of this conversation. But what we really need to do is go ahead and pivot and put ourselves in the position of configuring the way that somebody said it over there earlier, but now let's really dive into that prevention takes place. Because I keep hearing about all this money that's out there for grants and all these people who want to donate and people want to do things, people want to get involved. But then they have a caveat that it must be earmarked for this or it must be subjugated to this, and it can't go towards one of these things. I don't know if it's because it doesn't have their heart, but what I do know is that at the end of the day, folks that really need, and you can see they suffer. And if I'm being honest, the reason that they suffer is because there are folks who have these assumptions as to why they are, how they are, and the way that they got that way. And if you are a believer, the first thing you understand about them is that we all have the same name, image bearer. And if we are all image bearers, then we are all worthy of, deserving the flourishing that the King has for each and every one of our lives. I'm sorry, your Bible doesn't say nothing different than my Bible. So we both look at John 10:10, it says life to the full, correct? And so life to the full is supposed to be for anyone, especially believers. And so we need to put ourselves in a position to be able to state that case. When I look at those situations, when I see those environments, and I've seen them up close and personal, I've seen them firsthand, I no longer see it. I see homeless. I've seen them all. I no longer see the situation, and I no longer see the label. I see the face of Jesus. And then from there, I recognize my duty and fiscal responsibility to help to bring them out of that. Understanding that some still push up against it because they don't trust anyone anymore either. And that's one of the main reasons that I see those being trafficked, put into those spaces as well. Even when they get into these subsystems, we help a lot of survivors on their journey to freedom. They're still shy approaching us, knowing that we're supposed to be the help. So what are we supposed to do when they fear the help in certain instances? I'm gonna stop there.
That's great. Yeah.
Thank you. This is fascinating, and I'll preface my question, which is 2-part if you'll indulge me. I'll preface it by saying I don't know a lot about any of this. I'm in the hotel business, so I know that we do human trafficking training with our staff. But frankly, as an executive, I've never done the training myself. But there's a couple of comments that strike me, and I'd love to dig into, if you will. But I think somebody said something like 60 or 80% of the trafficking starts in the household. Can we start with the 60 to 80%? Why? What is driving that? I grew up in a world that didn't even know this existed, but 60 to 80% is staggering. How do we start there, and why? What's the motivation? Do we know much about it?
You take my take.
There's a few reasons. The first one, unfortunately, goes back to demand. When demand is high, it is particularly when it's children and your own children, or not, even not your own children. It could be, you know, a family member, a neighbor, someone, you know, close in your inner circle. There is a loyalty on children's part. The chances of being told and the chances of that being believed and prosecutable are real low. So they, quite frankly, can get away with it. When the demand is high, it's easy money. I don't know how to say it nicer or plainer than that, but it's easy money. And at one point, we have seen that grow, right? Brittany mentioned we saw it grow in COVID. The reason for that specific growth in COVID is that a lot of the trafficking was happening outside of our own country and people were being brought in at the time. When COVID happened, everyone was locked down. So not only did the demand spike because people were not allowed to be interacting with one another. Now you have an isolation issue, mental health issue, boredom issue, and all these other pieces. No one was flying in and out, and we did see it increase because of that as well.
So just to clarify, when you talk about demand, are these typically households where the parentals or close network is already engaged in sex trafficking or trafficking in general, and because there's demand, they're then going to their tight network to expand? Is that what you're saying?
Complicated issue, of course. So, for context, the United States is in the top 3 nations in the world now for human trafficking. We are ranked up there with Mexico and the Philippines. A huge part of that is the demand that Lindsay was speaking to. We had a history where the demand would flow out of the country and sex tourism was happening, you know, in places you expect, Amsterdam, Thailand, the places that we go to red light districts. When COVID happened and it locked down on American soil, the demand turned inward. It didn't go away. What happened is that buyers realized that the chances of them being prosecuted for purchasing commercial sex, regardless of age, it was so low risk. And so those friend groups and those tight-knit circles started to operate more heavily these child trafficking rings. Historically, child sexual abuse, which 1 in 4 girls and 1 in 9 boys will experience some form of sexual abuse before the age of 18, all of a sudden there was a way for people to monetize what was already happening in the family unit, whether that was through in-person engagement or recording of that content for distribution to the global market of child sexual abuse material. And so that's really what's driving so much of this. It was a problem that's always existed. We just didn't have the lens to really see the scope and reality of it. And to the conversation around that we outlawed it in 2015 in the Commonwealth, like, it's very hard to bring a case for prosecution against trafficking. We're looking at the trials or investigations that'll go 18 to 24 months. If they span multiple states, we're looking at multi-jurisdictional cases that then have to bump up to our federal agencies. Unfortunately, we just have a really hard, complex dynamic. It goes to show why this isn't an easy answer. It has to come through legislation, and legislation with teeth, if we want to take it from the predatory standpoint.
You're right, Brittany. These cases are difficult to prosecute, and part of that is because of the relationships between the trafficking victims and their traffickers. It's also because of our evolving understanding of the fact that trafficking victims are in fact victims and should be treated as such and not as co-conspirators or aiders and abettors of the trafficking activity, whether it is what we would have otherwise called prostitution, whether it is theft, whether it is drug dealing, whether it is labor trafficking. Back in the olden days, and I'm talking about 10 years ago, well, trafficking victims would be criminally charged and would be threatened with criminal convictions and jail or prison time for actions of which they were legally not guilty. We don't need trafficking laws per se, so long as we honor the common law of duress. A trafficking victim is under duress, and for hundreds of years, Anglo-American common law says that if you're under duress, you're not guilty. Prosecutors would hold charges open on trafficking victims and lean on them to secure convictions. We no longer do that. As victims become survivors, they will sometimes cooperate and sometimes not. But as We see with substance use disorder, a trafficking victim often will fall into the hands of another abuser quickly, and charges against the abuser disappear in turn. If you don't mind for one more second, it's always dangerous to offer a lawyer a microphone. First of all, I want to commend everybody. This is in the spirit of Jefferson. People have been honest and willing to play devil's advocate. I am particularly gratified to hear talk of adverse childhood experiences. Valerie Slater with Rise for Youth out of Richmond is a huge proponent of these ideas and would use them in prosecution of children. Lou gets a ton of credit because the word poor is a 4-letter word in American politics. Republicans don't talk about poor people. Democrats don't talk about poor people. They may talk about the middle class, but the poor and the working poor especially are voiceless. We need to take care of it here. The convergent end of discussions that we are having is NIMBYism. I'm really glad that you said the word NIMBY, because I can tell you, I'm a progressive prosecutor. The place where my brothers and sisters get unseated are the places where NIMBYism is the strongest. And when there is a demand for a criminal justice solution to a public health and social problem. The places where we do the best is where NIMBYism is at its weakest, because people don't demand jail for something that doesn't deserve jail. The answer to some of these problems, the very short one that I would offer, is the deconcentration of poverty. We will always have poor people. There will always be some people who have more money than others. But there was a very interesting inadvertent social experiment in Memphis about 20 years ago. Memphis demolished all of its public housing and then watched where the crime went. What they found was that crime was very much like busing, educational busing. In general, produced massively better outcomes for the children of poor people with no substantial or measurable decrease in the educational and social outcomes for rich people. And if the poor people who were dispersed into Memphis's neighborhoods generally did not impact the crime rate until poverty reached a certain tipping point. Once it hit the tipping point, you saw the social pathologies of concentrated poverty. During COVID, the lion's share of the violence that we saw happened in census tracts where young men were either out of school or out of work, and where the rate of poverty was 30% or greater. To deal with that, to deal with the supply problem, you need to fight the NIMBYs, accessory dwelling units, the abolition of single-family zoning, and minimum lot sizes, access to credit. These are the things that we need to do. We need to make everywhere look like Texas. I say that as a progressive. We need to make everywhere look like Texas. We need to let people build. And as we let people build, then housing becomes cheaper. I could spend another half an hour ranting about the fact that my father-in-law, who was in the United Mine Workers, could put 3 children into graduate school and college on a single income. And that's just not available. My smartest clients when I was a juvenile public defender were the drug dealers, because they made the economically rational decision to deal drugs because that was what was available to them educationally and in their environment.
Just want to speak really briefly to the understanding of that, and actually a combination of a couple of things. Lou, you said a word earlier, squeezed out, and immediately my soul kind of leapt, just because in the city of Norfolk specifically, I can't speak about anybody else's city, but we have NIMBY all over the place, and it's really disrespectful looking. If you look in Ghent, you can see it. These beautiful new buildings or revised buildings that are right across the street from subsidized or Section 8 housing. But we've noticed an uptick, and we talked about it, the raising rates. NIMBY is spreading like wildfire in the city, and unfortunately, it's intentional. When I was a director of a nonprofit called the Urban Renewal Center, we had a brilliant director of research, and he had a real curious mind that looked into the understanding of what housing was doing in our city. And he thought it was based off of a couple of companies that were coming in and trying to buy up all these properties. And what he discovered was that it was actually multiple global organizations that had set up tens to hundreds of shell companies purchasing property between here and Richmond. And what they were doing was, for well-paying citizens that were working hard, Even if they had their payments, their rent was being paid on time, they would still evict them. That they would renovate these properties and raise the rent rate 3 times the normal amount so that other people could come in. I don't know if you noticed, but that was when some of that uptick began, because this is circa 2020, 2021. And gang activity specifically started to uptick, specifically in 23504. So I'm not surprised to hear some of the things that we're hearing, because the name of the article was squeezed out, why we can't afford to live in Hampton Roads anymore.
Exactly right.
And so I just wanted to attaboy all of that.
I could offer a little bit of a ray of hope. That's something that works, you mentioned. I grew up in an affluent neighborhood, an extremely good public school system in Potomac, Maryland. You know, wonderful incomes, beautiful houses. We got bused into our school system, people from a Section 8 housing development, and the adults went nuts. Us kids, I was a bit of a nerdy kid. I always kind of looked at things around me and was a little bit more introspective than typical 12 and 13-year-olds. But us kids thought, this is awesome. Our football team's going to be a lot better. We had people it was predominantly African-American people, but we all went to school together. It was really cool, and I got to go over their houses. They got to come over our houses. It worked, and that's where the newbies come in, because people in that neighborhood were outraged that this was happening, that their kid went to school with those kids. And yet, if you asked any of the kids, it was great. This is wonderful. How cool is this? I didn't know how other people were living. You know, I only knew about our immediate neighbors. So maybe it is all faith-based. It's that we've got to look a lot more like Jesus wants us to look. And get over yourself. I mean, you're not any better than anybody else, right? We're just people. We're all trying to get where we're all trying to get to. And given the chance, 95% of the people are going to go the way it's supposed to go. And so it really gets concerning where I think, and unfortunately I think the country's headed this way. If I'm right, then you must be wrong. We've got to get past that. Little programs here and there that integrate the different classes. Mixed-use housing is a wonderful idea, as opposed to Section 8 or public housing. If you're going to build 200 units, then let's have 30 units that are below that 80%. And because they're just people. And once you see that they're just people, then it works. We just have to advocate as many people as possible for doing the Christian thing, or the Jewish thing, or whatever it may be, that the good Lord tells us where we ought to be.
So just out of curiosity, because we have a large group here, is there anyone here that doesn't know what NIMBY means? Okay, I knew there would be at least one. NIMBY stands for Not in My Backyard. You can do whatever you want, but not in my backyard. You can make that housing over there, but not in my backyard. It's a very important thing that's being discussed right now, because we're happy to have affordable housing, but I don't want it near me. The problem is some people that need affordable housing need it in the same areas where there isn't right now, which is where accessory dwelling units comes in. Often we have, and this isn't quite on the topic of trafficking, but we have senior citizens who live in houses and they don't have anywhere to go. If they could move into a granny pod in the backyard of some neighbor or family member, that allows a house for someone else to move into, and it allows the housings to recycle. Thank you. But I think the most important thing right now is education, and it's letting people understand what's going on in these other areas. So people who are going to gangs and trafficking and selling drugs, they don't feel like they have another choice, and in many instances it would be incredibly difficult for them to have another choice. Part of that is everything about where they are is more difficult. It's the housing that they can barely afford, the school system that doesn't have the additional services, the ability to deal with healthcare. If I was working a job that I could barely afford to pay my rent, I would not be able to take that 2 hours to fix that bill. As a realtor, I tell people, because I think it's really important, I spend time driving all over Hampton Roads, and I'm in very affluent neighborhoods and very poor neighborhoods. Did you know that even the flow rate at the gas pump is different? If I go into a low-income neighborhood, the amount of time that it takes me to fill up my gas tank is at least twice as long as if I go into an affluent neighborhood. Everything about it is more difficult. Transportation, everything. But if we're not educating the NIMBYs on what is going on and why it's important to move some of these people into an ADU, allow for zoning for multifamily, allow, more of the affordable units in a big construction project, you have to educate what's going on and how that will actually lift people up instead of pulling us down.
Yeah, if I may indulge, I just want to circle back to this topic. It sounds like the fundamental underlying issue is wealth disparity. Can we agree on that?
Yes.
Lou, I'm going to put you on the spot. I don't know you very well, but I know of you very well. How do we start to change the narrative? The capitalist world that we live in, we like money. Probably most of the people in this room have benefited from the capitalist society that we have. And so, taking my housekeepers, for example, that make $12 to $15 an hour and paying them $30 is not going to happen tomorrow, right? How do we move forward? I just don't really get it. The gap has gotten so dramatic. And people in this room are part of the problem, but I can tell you right now, our investors aren't going to tolerate doubling our wages. It's not going to happen. And you have a lot more experience in this than I do. I'm just curious, from your lens, how do we get people like you part of the conversation, educating your colleagues and mine to some extent on the benefits of closing that gap?
That's a really difficult question and a very long answer. When we first took our company public, and I had to go on the road to cities across the country and sell our wares, one of my big features was what a great company we were in terms of what we do in the community and the career advancement we had for people. And people stayed with our company forever. I would spend a good 10 minutes on what great people we are. And the investment bankers pulled me aside after about 3 meetings. Said, nobody wants to hear that. Don't care. And so I kind of took that out of our narrative. But I say that as an anecdote about where people are. Capitalism is a wonderful system, and it's done. It's almost like to paraphrase Churchill. It's the worst system except for all the others. It's produced so much. We've advanced in so many areas. The problem is that it doesn't pay to take care of the poorest of the poor. That's where what I like to call it is compassionate capitalism, right? Is that there is benefit, it's longer term, but there is benefit in compassion in the long term. Because if we lift everybody up, then we're all going to do a lot better. It's easy to say, and particularly if you've got nice clothes and a nice place to live, it's almost disingenuous to say you ought to be doing this. But the truth is you ought to be doing this. And it's not against the profit motive, whether it's for a city or for a university or even a private company. Long term, you get paid, and you get paid handsomely. In our company, we were really way out there in terms of taking care of employees. And it cost us a lot of money when we were first starting. I was with the same company for 40 years. And so we prided ourselves on going way overboard with the perks of being involved in a family-oriented company. And it cost us a lot. But we had people spend their whole careers with our company. And I can tell you, in any company, turnover is a killer. You know that.
At $12 to $15 an hour, you get a lot of it.
But I guess somebody had said, it's really education. I mean, educate people that the long-term view is the view that will be the most capitalistically speaking profitable.
Hi, thank you. I work with realtors and I'm trafficking survivors, so my lives are intersecting. One of the things, the good point that was brought up is that we believe in smart growth principles, which is to have housing gone to the bedroom neighborhoods where one income level lives here and another income level lives here. So that will address the NIMBYism question, so when everybody can live everywhere. The obstacle that we're running up against is zoning regulations, and that is a big thing that we are concentrating on this year in our lobbying efforts, is to get zoning regulations under control so we can build communities where people have a sense of place, every income level lives everywhere, so that you get walkable communities, easy transport communities, things like that, transportation that you can address so that people have an opportunity to start their lives in a place where they don't have to commute for hours at a time. We've adopted a phrase called attainable living, because if I live in Suffolk but my job is in the oceanfront, that's not attainable living. So we have to be able to have a place where we can live, work, and play, but have it be so that the person that needs childcare has a place close by that they can go to that's affordable, that they can walk home. They don't have to worry about getting a bus or any other kind of way to get to work. So those are the kinds of things that we're doing. One of the problems that I see to address all of this that's happening is that a lot of trafficking is done in the dark, right? This whole slavery is more prevalent today than it's ever been in the history of the world, and we're too busy arguing about what happened in the 1800s in America. Right now, we need to bring sunlight on this. There's a triangle: the victim, the buyer, and the seller. Let's address this demand. Let's talk about it more publicly, in my personal opinion. People who are buyers should be outed. The seller, because the victim pays all the consequences. They're the ones that go to jail. They're the ones that have the criminal records. They're the ones who can't get a job afterwards. So we need to make these buyers pay the consequences. The demand has to go. And the higher you go, because I believe most of the demand comes from affluent people who can afford to keep this under the radar, right? So we have to address this problem with the demand, and we're talking about social media, we're talking about the internet. I am a free speech, freedom person, but we have to take responsibility and not depend on the government to regulate it to death. People respond to consumer demand. So if we can get this OnlyFans and all the things that are gateways to trafficking, if we can reduce the demand and really start calling out demand for what it is and give it a name and give it faces, then I think we can start to address that. And I'm sorry.
I love all the passion in the room. It's great.
So many questions. There seem to be some common threads. The concept of trying to spread out the concentration of poverty, that's directly linked to housing policy and zoning code and regulations, as was just brought up. I actually want to ask Brittany a brief question, because if we're talking about how housing and trafficking interrelate, there seems to be a lot of focus on certainly affordable, attainable housing, the deconcentration of poverty, and how that is facilitated through government regulation, zoning policy. People like that have been in your profession that have to go and build the housing and spread it out. One of my questions, though, was just spoken to a little bit. Is there a statistical direct correlation between socioeconomic status and the demand? Everyone's talking about demand being a big problem. Is there a direct correlation to that?
Great question.
Wait for tomorrow. Yes, there is.
Okay, so demand obviously has to be talked about. Studies show that 6% of the population will engage in purchasing commercial sex. But when you look at those numbers, you have about a 2.5% to 3% that are your high frequency buyers. Those high frequency buyers fuel 75% of the revenue generated through purchasing of commercial sex in the United States. We estimate this to be a $5.9 billion industry, the second largest criminal enterprise in the world, and outpacing drugs at this point. You're looking at about 2.5% of the population driving 75% of that $5.9 billion. The only people who can be driving that level is going to be your affluent, upper middle class buyers. And that's just based on the numbers. So we have to go after that. But your point about where I love talking about is the prevention side, because I think that's where we have to get to, is why we're talking about root cause. Like, I mean, that's the purpose of talking about affordable housing, is that we have to talk about root causes that create the vulnerabilities, that create these high ACEs scores, that create a fertile soil for trafficking to thrive. But if we want to go after this issue and eradicate trafficking, we really have to get to prevention solutions for the 60% that are being trafficked by family members, because that's going to get us the biggest win the fastest. And we have to go after the 75% of buyers who are fueling 75% of revenue every year. If we do those while watching our legislators increase penalties against traffickers and buyers, so that anybody who does participate in this heinous crime is held accountable, then we're really going to start systematically tackling the lion's share of the problem, and you start to see a cascading effect into the other areas. I want to go back to something that Anastasia touched on. This is not going to be solved by the government. If anybody's expecting the government to flow in with billions of dollars to solve human trafficking, it's not happening. The government, through the Department of Justice, invests around $120 million a year into anti-trafficking initiatives through their grant program. So $120 million going up against $5.9 billion, for all my capitalists in the room, is it going to work? No, it's not. So where does that come? Then it drives the requirement that we look at public-private partnership. We start to look at community activism, and then you all have to use the power of your voice to put behind the proper legislators in order to drive these conversations forward. If we don't do that, then we are missing the opportunity to be active participants in the future of Hampton Roads, of the Commonwealth, and of our country. This is about prevention, prosecution, protection of survivors, but then we have to bring in partnerships and policy, because it's never going to be solved by one person, one individual, or one organization. So that's where I stand on this issue.
I'm curious, are there any programs out there that provide rewards to reporting in for people? And where I'm going with that is, I'm thinking, if so much of this is happening in the hotel business, they were doing some training on it. It's been a big topic with the HLA, but everyone likes money. So if we paid the front desk clerk $100 to turn someone in, or $500, and maybe start with something small. It's not expensive.
I love the idea. So Safe House Project released an app called Simply Report. It's a proprietary AI platform that allows for anybody to report suspected trafficking. Working alongside the American Hotel and Lodging Association, International Luxury Hotel Association, and the brands to mobilize identification rates out of the hospitality industry. Over 75% of victims of trafficking will stay in a hotel during their exploitation. But what we're seeing as a challenge is that the training only goes so far, because at the end of the day, the hotels are being held liable for any trafficking that's happening on premise. Last week, a case closed for $40 million out of Decatur, Georgia, against one of the brands. That makes the brands hesitant to incentivize people to disclose, because if anything happened on the property, they're afraid of the risk side of it. So what we're doing at Safe House Project is working alongside the hotels and pull in the technical indicators. How many times the door locks are opening? How many times are the sensors going? Is there unusual patterns with payment processing and everything else, in order to create a totality of circumstances that would allow for us to, the same way the financial institutions hit a suspicious activity report, trigger that into the hotel's PMS system in order to help identify and start to early interdict those trafficking situations. But on that note, because we're not here to talk about hospitality, I could talk about this stuff all day long, I'm so sorry. I'm going to give all of you a chance to give a final remark of what do you think is a solution from your lens when we talk about 7 different mayors, 7 different jurisdictions, complex housing challenges, rising inflation. What is the one thing that you would want somebody to take away today? What would be their action step?
We need to figure out how to tell people and show them that you cannot serve 2 masters. In short, we've already said it. There's supply and demand and a driving force for this really inhumane act that is human trafficking. What I didn't say earlier about the whole squeezed out thing is on the other side, housing would be really great if the ones who were buying these places and renovating them weren't giving a guaranteed, listen, this is not hyperbole, over 200% return on investment. That's really enticing. You know, I look at my indexes and they might hopefully give me 11.9% year over year, 200%. What do you do with that when someone is guaranteed the opportunity to continue their affluence or to become affluent by investing in that? And so as we look at this space that we live in called Hampton Roads and see all of the beautiful things that we have to engage in, I definitely want to say you cannot serve two masters. And also, what would it take for us to really find the invaluable nature of people? Because if we could see how priceless everyone truly is, if we could really see the worth, the value, if we could see the Jesus in people, if we could see the fact that everyone truly is an image bearer of our Creator, I believe that the conviction itself would drive down trafficking and drive up the desire to make sure that everyone had a place to stay and the opportunity, the right, the dignity that we all so desperately deserve in this season. We don't just look at somebody as an opportunity for gain or at least an enemy, but we look at them as our brother, as our family, as our community, and as the love that Christ really is.
Everything's connected. I think that's what I would ask everybody to take away from this. The root causes of gang violence, of the drug trade, of shoplifting, of shootings are similar to the root causes of human trafficking. The solutions are the same too. We need to have a world where people can have a dignified work, where that work will allow them to have a dignified life, where it will encourage family formation and the having and proper rearing of children. That's what politics is supposed to be about, to figure out how to get there. We have a range of political opinions at this table, we have a range of political opinions in the audience. Everybody loves mom, everybody loves apple pie. The fights we have are over how to get to our core principles, and we cannot simply treat human trafficking as one kind of problem and the breakdown of the American marriage as another, or the disappearance of blue-collar jobs as one problem and the inability of children to read as another. These are all a common problem. How can you work and put a roof over your head and everything else falls into place? So we are not going to solve those problems now. That's why the fights at the national, state, and local political level are so vicious, because people really disagree on how the allocation of wealth should work in America. What is the government's role and what is the private sector's role? There isn't such a thing as a housing solution or a public safety solution or an education solution. All of these things flow from the same root. If we are trying to solve these questions, or if we're trying to solve these problems, the questions we should ask ourselves are, how does this policy relate to assisting people to have a dignified life? And what are the incentives that we are creating both for individuals and for large institutions, whether they're governments, corporations, private sector, or charitable organizations to pursue those goals?
Thank you. As I sit here and fellows, it takes me back. I'm not from here. I'm from the Midwest. I'm from Oklahoma. I lived in Kentucky, Tennessee, Texas, and this is the last place I've lived. My parents have asked me several times, why don't you come home? Why do you stay so far away? This is the only place that, as an adult, felt like home. The diversity here is something I appreciate. I didn't have that in those other locations. But the painful part is there's so much segregation that still happens here. It's painful to see day in and day out us fighting against each other when we all really want the same things. I really advocate we have to start teaching our youth, who are going to be the ones taking care of us, about these raw truths, about these things that really are going on in our community, whether it be about healthcare outcomes, whether it be about human trafficking, about housing. They are the ones going to be the future change agents, but they don't learn about these things until later. I heard the word sheltered a lot here. I didn't know about this. I hadn't heard about this. It's because we didn't experience it. But it happens. It happens every single day. Every store you go into, every hospital you go into, anywhere you go, you are going to be exposed to a person that has experienced one of these. 1 in 4, 1 in 9, male, female. You've been touched by it, you just didn't know it. But we also don't educate our youth on the things that don't feel good. We have to start finding a way to do that younger so that when they become adults, they are prepared to be those change agents. Thank you.
So obviously, extremely complex problem that we're all discussing today, and there's no one size fits all, as we all know. I think that on a really pedestrian level, what I think is a nice starting point for a solution is to disperse poverty. If we can do more mixed income housing through incentivizing developers, or a city in a development, maybe these 6 houses don't pay proffers if that developer is willing to sell them at such and such a price. If we can get things more integrated, peer pressure works. You do what people around you are doing, right? If we can disperse the poverty and disperse the income, then I think it would put us on a much better road than what we're on now. And that's why we got to get rid of the whole NIMBYs. This is going to enrich your life, not hurt your life. And I think we can get there if enough of us speak out. It's just society that's keeping it this way. And if we want to change the society, it's simply we demand it because it works. People gravitate to what they know, and if I know something better because of the environment I've been put in, I want to be like those guys instead of what I've always known because it's inescapable. Thank you.
Thank you. First of all, I wrote some notes, and I believe Lindsay mentioned, she said pimps and popes. And it's hard to hear. When she said it, you know, it rang differently. They're hard words to hear. But this is not a polite conversation. We also heard black and white. We heard the word poor. We heard not in my backyard. It's hard to listen to. Even the word sex trafficking is hard to listen to. But we have to have these conversations. Secondly, I want to talk about the faith-based community. And me, as a black woman, when we talk about youth, my safety came from the church. It's where we learned to read. It was where we learned to write. It was where we got information. It was where we were introduced to politics. It was where we were introduced to society. It was where we just learned to become. So I would like to see, and I'm not stepping on any toes, but this is a Jeffersonian debate, right? I would like to see the faith-based community wrap our arms around the community just a tad bit more, because we turn a blind eye. We see things in the church and we turn a blind eye to it because we don't know how to approach it. So that's the other thing. And not in my backyard, just a really funny story about that. I live in Port Norfolk, and I was at a Civic League meeting, and someone from the city came, and of course the city was asking, or the residents of Port Norfolk was saying, well, how do we stop Section 8 from coming to our community? And then they asked, how can we limit the number of vouchers? How can we limit the number of people that are on Section 8 in our community? It's so many vouchers out there on the street, and if they can find a house available for Section 8 rental, then it can be 100% Section 8 rental in that community. But that was a legit question, but it comes from education. More forums like this will help with that. Thank you so much.
I just want to say thank you because I thought I was going to be the only one that said, I think we need to spread everybody out. So that because I have not met anybody on here prior to today. So I like that you said there's one thing that we can work on and focus on. And what comes to mind to me, and maybe this is too simplistic, but man, if every one of us in this room, if we all put together, couldn't we afford one apartment? Relatively, not all that painfully. Like, one apartment. And that's not even business owners, that's just like talking individuals, right? So it seems pretty simple, like looking at it through that lens, like what would it take? You keep counting up, what would it take? Okay, what's the cost of a unit? All right. So in the same vein, it seems, and I'm sorry if I'm just oversimplifying, but in my head it seems that simple. When we've got good people, we do have good people in our community. Genuinely, we have good people who are running businesses and good people who are out there. Why aren't we talking together a little bit more? I work in anti-trafficking and have no political experience, but there are politicians who have tons of political experience, right? We all have these incredible skills, opportunities, wisdoms, abilities, and connections, all the way down to somebody who might be making $12 an hour. They still have their own wisdom, insights, and abilities. If we're working together purposefully, not with other people that I agree with, not with other people that are similar to me, but purposefully picking other people that I don't fully understand and that do things a little bit differently, and building little pods to try and do something together. To me, that makes sense. So I guess that's my 2 cents today.
My conclusion from this is I feel a little bit more hopeful because we're having a conversation. We're talking about it out in the open, and we're talking about it across disciplines. We're talking about it from different angles. People have different experiences. I think it's so important. We're not going to solve this by making 1,000 houses more affordable. We're not going to fix this by doing any one thing. It has to be a holistic approach, and it has to be discussed across lots of different experiences, lots of disciplines. We all have to come together. I don't think the government is going to fix this. All they're going to do is fight, but what we can do is come together and figure out the solutions and take it to them and say, we all agree on this. Look at all of these different people that you think are fighting amongst each other. We've all come up with the common ground, what we all agree on. So here's the 90% of it that we all agree on, and you can hash out the last 10% yourselves. Having more and more discussions like this with more and more people is the best way to move this forward.
As somebody who works in government, I know for sure the government is not going to solve this. Well, I'd inject some humor in there. Because people look to us a lot. They look to us all the time for solutions. We can provide what we can, but we need partnerships. We need to hear what is the need? What are other people's ideas on how to solve it? In my seat, my role is to ask when people come to me with an issue, what can the city do? There are things we can do. For example, land. We are starting now, because of this housing crisis, to have more action, at least in Virginia Beach, on our city council towards housing solutions. I feel like we have a good council that is pushing forward with affordable housing solutions. While there's a lot of negativity, I feel positive. Sometimes I listen to the public and hear the negativity, but then when I see the decisions that are being made, it gives me hope, because it's the leadership of the city making those wise decisions and trying to make progress. I also wanted to bring up, we talked about NIMBY, but there's another group. Have you heard of YIMBY? So there's a group called Yes in My Backyard, and I believe it started out in California. It has spread, and I know there's a local chapter. What's disheartening to me as somebody who works in government is when I hear these affordable housing rezonings come to city council, is hearing all the negativity. I really hope for some of you or people who understand the connection between housing stability and the impacts, the negative impacts when people don't have stable housing. If you come out, or people who have been impacted by it come out and tell their stories, they don't necessarily have to come to a public meeting. They can call their council person if they don't feel comfortable speaking in public. But, they need to hear all the voices. And what happens at these meetings is we only hear one side publicly. And those people who come to the meetings and are against something get very frustrated when the decision doesn't come out in their favor, and they don't understand why. And I understand why, and our city leadership understands why. They're hearing the fact that there's vulnerable people out there, there's people that can't find housing. You all have a voice, and you can make your voices heard, and you can speak out in favor of integrating and bringing affordable housing to places where people are not in favor of it. Thank you.
So to wrap us up, I hope that you all took a lot from tonight. Housing is not a partisan issue, even though it has been made a partisan issue. We will all agree that it is highly politicized at this point, but to the point of every single person on this panel, we're talking about human beings who need a place to lay their head at night, to invest in their families, to grow their families, to strengthen our community. And so an investment into land or into structures is an investment into people. And so what should be driving the dialogues, what should be bringing us the hope, is the recognition that everybody has value, dignity, and worth as a human being, not as a commodity to be sold in our communities, but as something that we can go back and fight for. When we have these dialogues, we have the opportunity to maybe walk away with a new perspective that we didn't consider before, or maybe it challenges some of our prejudices. And being introspective in our analysis of maybe where we've come from and the information we received is only going to make us a stronger advocate, not on our own behalf, but on the behalf of those in our own community. And so I hope that each of you thinks about what are those 1 or 2 points? What are 1 or 2 things that you're like, I really want to learn more about this piece, or I am going to make that call to my delegate or at the local level. But also think about our federal legislators. They are pushing legislation that informs the tax incentive structures, that brings the federal funding down through our government agencies. This machine works together, and the challenge is when we break into silos. More than anything, I hope that you see we are working to bust through these siloed conversations to bring a collective impact model to really complex situations. So I just want us to give our panelists a round of applause.